Nujabes' work was characterized by a commitment to high-quality sound and innovative techniques, blending the warmth of analog with the clarity of digital to create music that was both timeless and forward-looking, writes Japanese magazine People and Tools in the only interview ever conducted with Nujabes. To start, it's important to understand Nujabes' production philosophy, captured in this quote. "Once I start making a song, it takes me at least a year to finally publicize it. Based on my experience, I would hypothesize that Nujabes might compose 80% of a track within a few days, but then spend several months re-listening and making small adjustments to meet his high standards. He doesn't work on the song for 8 hours a day for that entire year. Instead, he invests a few minutes to a few hours here and there, refining it whenever inspiration strikes. The meticulous care that Nujabes poured into his music is apparent throughout his discography. However, in the 2003 interview, the man himself shared the following perspective. I take very special care in where my sample music source comes from and spend a lot of time deciding what I will or will not use. Nujabes' drums primarily came from sampled records, indicating that when emulating his style, we need to replicate the vintage sound of vinyl in the digital realm. The most effective and obvious method to achieve this is by sampling records directly. In this project, I combined a sampled drum break from a track on Tracklab with an acoustic drum kit recording, layered together and chopped to create a Nujabes inspired groove. We have You might consider leaving the beat here, as Nujabes' drums are often understated in the mix, particularly noticeable on his second album, Modal Soul. However, my intention was to accentuate the drums more, akin to tracks like Lovesick Part 1-4, The Final View, and the entirety of Metaphorical Music. These pieces feature more pronounced drums, prompting me to layer mine with additional kicks and snares to enhance their impact. These samples are from my Nujabes sample library, available on Samples by Vanity. Because there are 2 live recordings of a drum kit in this project, the timings of the drums are naturally off the grid. Despite rearranging them, I ensured to keep the off-the-grid timings to retain the original groove. The kicks and snares hit slightly late, providing a laid-back feel that's common in hip-hop. This late feel is evident in Nujabes' drum grooves, likely a result of his use of sampled breaks. I've gone through and aligned all of the kicks and snares that I added in to play under the sampled breaks to ensure there are no misaligned transients or flamming issues. Because I've chopped the breaks, there are gaps that could be filled with further editing. However, I find a much better solution is to layer in a live hat loop. This decision was inspired by tracks like Peaceland and Lovesick Part 3, which feature pronounced 16th note hat grooves. The drums are then routed to a processing group. I've aimed to maintain a minimalist approach akin to Nujabes' style. Within this group, there's a clipper, which is just chopping a smidge off the peaks of the transients, reducing their dynamic range, and introducing slight amounts of distortion. If you don't have a clipper, I'd recommend K-Clip Zero, which is the free version of this plugin. Next is my current favorite analog modeling compressor, the Distressor, used to glue everything together. I'm also utilizing a slow attack and fast release time, which pumps up the tail of the drum, making it sound fuller. Next is Spiff, a spectral transient shaper. Nujabes did have an SPL Transient Designer hardware unit in his studio, indicating that he shaped the transients of his drums. The black box saturator is then adding in harmonic distortion and tube coloration, providing a thickening effect across the project. Here's an A/B comparison of all of the group plugins. One of the standout features of Nujabes' production was his knack for sourcing samples that evoke a deep, melancholy feeling. This essence was perfectly captured by Funky DL, a British rapper and early collaborator with Nujabes, describing Nujabes' music as having a unique vibe that feels almost sad yet uplifting at the same time. One factor for this uniqueness was due to the significant advantage Nujabes had over other crate diggers of his era, owning not one but two record stores brimming with sampling material. This extensive collection is evident in his diverse range of sampled genres, including jazz, especially modal jazz, Latin, soul, bossa nova, Brazilian, ambient, and more. How Nujabes processed his samples falls into one of two categories. The first method involved leaving the samples largely untouched, except for some pitch adjustments. A portion of the sample is then looped throughout the track, sometimes alone and sometimes with accompanying instrumentation. Examples of this style include Feather, Horizon, and perhaps his most well-known track, Shiki no Uta, featuring vocalist Minimi. The second method follows a more classic approach to sampling, chopping, pitching, and rearranging the samples to suit Nujabes' artistic vision. Tracks like Reflection Eternal, Aeolian Dance, and perhaps his most creative, Battle Cry, are great examples of this style. For this project, I left the sample alone, choosing only to pitch shift it up 4 semitones and slow the tempo down from 112 to 100 BPM, which is within Nujabes' tempo range. Here's the original sample from Tracklip titled Main Skin by Bremer McCoy. I sampled this 8-bar section from bar 41. I applied an EQ to remove all of the bass and any high end that was not contributing to the sound, as well as scooping out some of the mud around 500 Hz. Then I added a compressor to ensure the sample plays at a consistent volume by reducing its dynamic range. Saturation came next to add harmonics and thicken the sound, then a Neold Warble plugin, a vintage tape modulation effect to add some wow, flutter and noise, making the sample sound more like it was sourced from an old vinyl. There was a lot of resonance poking out, so Pro MB is taking care of that. I also noticed that Nujabes' tracks have a lot of stereo width in them, so I added an imager to spread out the sound. Here's an A/B comparison. A criticism often leveled at sample-based music is the notion that it's too simplistic or overly reliant on samples to be considered original. In many cases, this criticism is valid, particularly when producers attempt to pass off sampled material as their own. However, Nujabes stands out as a prime example of true sampling artistry. Nujabes likely spent weeks crate digging for the perfect samples, followed by a meticulous application of musical sensibility. He had a knack for finding the right groove and pairing it with the perfect instrumentation, all in a way that captured the intended emotion. The notion of simplicity often misconstrues the journey for the destination. Many of Nujabes' ideas, like most artists, didn't pan out and won't ever see the light of day. The small selection of an artist's discography we see represents only a fraction of the material they've ever created. We only hear the highlights, never all of the bad ideas they had to sift through to find the good ones. For the bass, I noticed that a double bass features across many of Nujabes' tracks. This is because they are a staple in jazz and often present in the material Nujabes sampled. When a double bass isn't used, Nujabes sometimes opts for a sub bass, as heard in tracks like Reflection Eternal. In other tracks, like Flowers, he uses a low kick drum in place of a bass line, and some tracks don't include any bass element at all. Nujabes seems to be led by the music rather than sticking to a specific formula. The sample I chose had a double bass playing under the piano, part of the reason I picked it. I did my best to isolate the bass frequencies on a separate channel using this EQ configuration. After that, I added a compressor to smooth out the peaks and maintain a consistent volume by reducing its dynamic range. The Brainworx subsynth then adds lower harmonics into the sound at 3 different bands. Interestingly, Nujabes had a DBX 120XDS subharmonic synthesizer in his studio, which inspired this Brainworx plugin, meaning he was likely doing something similar with analog equipment. Finally, there's a saturator, adding in some harmonic distortion and a sidechain to the kick drum. Here's an A/B of the entire plugin chain. To enhance the vintage tones on this project, I added a few colouring tools onto the master bus. The first plugin is another clipper. Having this at the start of the chain helps to soften the signal before it's sent into the preceding plugins. The second plugin is tape emulation. Although Nujabes didn't record to tape, many of his samples would have been printed to tape during their recording process. These emulations replicate the sonic characteristics of tape, such as saturation, slight compression, coloration, which often includes subtle boosts and cuts across the frequency spectrum, and noise elements like tape hiss and electronic noise from the recording equipment. Next comes the Neold Warble and saturation plugins that I covered earlier. I then got some additional stereo imaging separated across 2 bands. Lastly, I applied a limiter. This is usually Pro AL 2, but I've been getting nice results with Elevate by Newfangled Audio recently. Here's a gain matched A/B comparison of the whole chain. Thank you for watching.